Night had settled over Los Angeles like a velvet shroud, muting the city's familiar glitter and hustle beneath a pressing, inky blackness. The air felt different that evening, heavier, colder. Every gust of breeze tearing through palm fronds sent chills slipping down unseen backs. The usual hum of distant traffic and laughter seemed to falter, replaced with an odd, uneasy quiet that clung to the winding streets of Benedict Canyon, where the wealthy built sanctuaries high above the city's ordinary chaos. In the heart of this eerie silence, a particular house stood alone atop a gentle rise, its glowing windows a beacon against the night, but offering no hint of the shadows pooling behind locked doors. To the casual observer, this was just another luxurious haven where the glories of Hollywood basked in imagined security. No neighbor, no passerby, and certainly no soul inside could have fathomed the horror beginning to coil, silent and patient behind those walls. Inside the home, remnants of laughter lingered, echoing off marble surfaces and drifting through rooms steeped in star glamour. Sharon Tate, radiant in the soft light, curled herself on an elegant settee, one hand resting protectively on the delicate swell of her belly. She was nearly 9 months pregnant, her face the very picture of gentle anticipation and hope. With her, Abigail Folger, the poised coffee heiress, moved gracefully between conversations, her laughter ringing like silver chimes among friends. Earlier that day the city had seemed so alive, sunlight sparkling off Mercedes driving through sunset-lit canyons, the white noise of the world's movie capital pulsing with dreams and ambitions. But once the sun dipped past the horizon, an alien hush settled over the hills, as if the night itself had secrets to keep. The world outside the windows felt distant, almost entirely separate from the warmth that Sharon and her companions created, a final, lingering calm before the storm. Complex layers of darkness pressed in on every side, swallowing the gentle sway of branches and the subtle perfume of summer's last flowers. Anyone looking in might mistake the scene for an ordinary gathering, the young and beautiful spinning stories, the promise of new life filling the rooms with softness. Yet there was a subtle tension in the air, sensed rather than seen, as if each shadow along the baseboards and behind the curtains hid something sharp and watchful. Miles away, others were already moving, propelled by motives and delusions too twisted for the sunlit world to acknowledge. For now, though, the house remained a sanctuary. Sharon leaned back, closing her eyes for just a moment, letting her mind drift through pleasant memories. She pictured the future, a nursery flooded with morning light, the first cries of her child, lazy breakfast with her husband, and felt peace settle momentarily in her chest. Abigail, sensing the late hour, began gathering used cups, her thoughts a mix of contentment and the reliable rhythm of routine hospitality. No one noticed how the wind shifted, swirling stronger now, hissing through cracks and around doors as if whispering a warning that no one could hear. Out on the lonely road leading uphill, tire tracks marred the dust, evidence of unknown arrivals masked by darkness. Even the stars seemed to dim, shrouded by rolling fog. Elsewhere in Los Angeles the city continued its midnight pace, a patchwork of neon signs, muffled music and dreams chased or abandoned. But in this enclave of privilege and seclusion, time slowed. Every laughter echoed a touch too loudly. Each sudden silence, every fleeting glance toward curtained windows, hinted at an underlying disquiet. As night deepened, the world outside the home blurred into abstraction. Lights in neighboring mansions blinked out one by one, sending signals only the truly paranoid might heed. In the garden, shadows pooled with a slow, creeping intent, settling into flower beds and across flagstone paths. Inside, Sharon listened to a record spinning a gentle lullaby, her thoughts brimming with the unshakable certainty that her world was safe, her baby protected by these walls and these friends. But lurking beyond this domestic calm, a story far stranger and darker than fiction was crossing an invisible threshold. Behind the locked front door, no one could know that Los Angeles was teetering on the edge of an epic changing abyss, that in mere hours innocence would be lost, and with it, the foundational illusions of safety and sanctuary the city once held dear. Somewhere nearby, headlights cut briefly through the gloom before winking out. The quiet thrum of an engine faded, leaving only the huff of cooling metal and the crisp snap of gravel underfoot. Out there in the silence, purpose gathered with malignant patience. Eyes, wild and burning with fanatical certainty, fixed themselves on the distant glint of the house, an island of light awaiting an unthinkable storm. Inside, the friends exchanged sleepy goodnights. Sharon adjusted herself carefully, brushing a fallen lock of hair from her brow, feeling a twinge of exhaustion softened by happiness. Abigail set a half-empty cup in the sink, planning tomorrow's errands in her mind. None of them, so alive, so gloriously present, sensed the electric charge pooling in the night's stillness, a primordial energy that would soon reshape the course of hundreds of lives and haunt the world's imagination for decades to come. The blackness outside pressed ever harder, as if trying to seep inside. Legendary as Los Angeles was for its mythology of light and transformation, this night would mark a dreadful reversal, where glamour couldn't shield from terror, and fame offered no defense against the insidious reach of evil. The hushed city beyond, for once defenseless, held its breath along with the world, waiting for the horror about to unfold in this seemingly perfect sanctuary on the hill. The Cult of Charles Manson, drawing the fanatical circle. Charles Manson was not the sort of man who simply entered a room, he invaded it, a presence that radiated contradiction. Part prophet, part predator. From his early days of drifting through America's underbelly, he had learned how to read the vulnerable, the drifters, the outcasts, the broken-hearted looking for belonging. He was magnetic in all the worst ways, combining a folksy charm with an undercurrent of menace that could just as easily lull someone into confidence as it could destroy their last defense. He wasn't tall or physically imposing, but eyes lingered on him, haunted and wild, sparking with a kind of childlike intensity. Manson discovered the power of his voice behind the bars of prison and the blaring radios of the late 60s, an era swirling with chaos, war, and hungry souls desperate for meaning. He spoke in riddles and revelations, weaving bits of the Bible with Beatles lyrics, a homemade gospel that promised freedom, absolution, and apocalypse all at once. People didn't just follow Manson, they were drawn in, their pain and confusion subtly twisted to fit his own universe. He found his earliest loyalists on the margins of society, young women fleeing broken homes, men who never quite fit the straight and narrow, seekers brought low by acid trips and dreams that curdled in the California sunlight. To them, Manson became a father, a lover, a guru, even a messiah. He was relentless, almost ritualistic in his nightly gatherings. Under the flickering candlelight at the crumbling Spawn Ranch just outside Los Angeles, the so-called family would form a half-moon at Manson's feet. Dust swirled in beams of moonlight as guitars thrummed idly, and Manson's voice slithered through the crowd, guiding, warning, enchanting. He told stories of the coming revolution, helter-skelter times when the world would change and only his chosen few would survive. His followers hung on every syllable, quivering on the edge of devotion and fear. The family was surprisingly ordinary at first glance, mostly young women, their hair sun-bleached, their jeans torn, the men gaunt but almost gentle in their devotion. Yet beneath the surface, a strange transformation was underway. The group lived as if in a trance, their individual identities folding into the collective. They surrendered their names and their pasts for the privilege of belonging to something greater, or so Manson convinced them. Obedience became a ritual, acts of loyalty performed with escalating severity, breaking ties with families back home, handing over money, offering their bodies, sometimes even violence. Manson's approval was sacred, his disappointment a curse. Each night the stories he spun grew more outlandish and apocalyptic. He prophesied racial wars, the end of the false order, the birth of a new world in which only the family would reign. Manson controlled the family through a calculated blend of isolation, deprivation, and reward. He kept them high, mostly on LSD and amphetamines, but his influence ran deeper than drugs. He mixed moments of affection and acceptance with vicious psychological games. A compliment could be followed by a snarl, a kiss by a threat. Women, especially, became fiercely loyal, convinced he alone saw their true potential or beauty. He exploited their insecurities, then gave them purpose. He told them they were more than society's rejects, they were chosen, warriors in the coming apocalypse. He picked followers with a sixth sense for hidden wounds. There was Susan Atkins, lost and eager for a father figure, Patricia Krenwinkel, who became Manson's shadow, and Tex Watson, an all-American athlete whose ambition withered into blind obedience. They became his apostles, simultaneously worshippers and extensions of Manson's will. Manson preached his gospel not as sermons, but as spellbinding performances. Music and prophecy blurred together. One evening, maybe after a communal meal of beans and dandelion wine, he'd beckon his followers into the fire's shadow. "You know what's coming," he'd whisper. "You can feel it. "The world hates you, but I love you. When the deserts bleed and the cities burn, we will be safe. Only the family survives." His disciples, many tripping on psychedelics, saw him glow with a divine radiance. Who else had offered them a destiny? As the circle grew, the atmosphere at Spawn Ranch changed. The family became more insular, more suspicious, policing outsiders, obsessively recounting Manson's every word. Paranoia simmered, sharpened by talk of enemies and betrayals, casting long evening shadows across the dry hills. Sometimes, Manson would vanish for hours, only to return wild-eyed and breathless, ranting about secret signs or prophetic dreams. His madness was compelling, a performance that made others crave his approval. He began giving his followers new names, a way of breaking the world's hold, fracturing their pasts. Old identities faded, replaced by symbols and nicknames that only Manson controlled. Some family members shaved their heads or tattooed themselves as tokens of belonging. Those who questioned him were scorned, sometimes banished. For others, there was no life at all without the family. By late 1969, Manson's power was absolute within the ragtag commune. Even as he spoke of peace and love, rage simmered just below his surface, feeding on his conviction that the world owed him something enormous. He was certain of his destiny, unshakable, terrifying, and he made his followers certain too. Their faith became absolute, blinding, willing to do anything for their Messiah. To the world outside, the family was a curiosity, maybe a nuisance, just another group of hippies gone to seed in the California hills. But in the darkness, under the spell of Manson's voice, a very different story was being written. One of devotion that curdled into fanaticism, of ordinary seekers transformed into instruments of chaos. All the while, the man at the center, equal parts ringleader and seer, charlatan and visionary, played his final symphony, preparing to unleash the horror that would stain the collective memory of America forever. The Manson family, as the cult called themselves, was less a group and more a living fever dream stitched together from lost hopes and desperate souls, each drawn toward the warped beacon of Charles Manson's charisma. They weren't born to villainy or madness. Instead, they arrived at Spawn Ranch as broken pieces, young women running from fractured homes, hippies in search of community, drifters and wanderers who had become invisible to the rest of the world. What threaded them together wasn't just circumstance, but the hunger for belonging, a longing that Manson spotted with uncanny accuracy and never hesitated to exploit. Life at the ranch was, on its surface, little more than a counterculture commune, marked by the trappings of late 60s California. There were freedom and drugs, the din of folk music by the fireside, weed smoke drifting through the pony stable air. Yet behind all the laughter and the staged love, an invisible net cinched tighter with every passing day. Manson, with his crackling sermons and hypnotic gaze, became the unchallenged axis around which their world spun. To outsiders, the family's existence might have seemed like a wild youth's fantasy, but for those within, Manson was prophet, father, lover, and judge. He claimed to bring secret knowledge, a blueprint for surviving and thriving once the old world crumbled, a vision he adjusted as his own ambitions soured. Each new revelation was laced with urgency and fear, delivered in the darkness after communal meals, his followers pressed shoulder to shoulder and waiting for words that might explain their pain or grant them purpose. To them, Manson's voice was gospel, even when his teachings grew more deranged. Talk of an apocalyptic race war called Helter Skelter, coded prophecies scavenged from Beatles lyrics, and promises that together they would be reborn as a tribe destined to shape the world that followed. What made the family dangerously unique wasn't just shared ideology, it was the ceaseless erosion of self. New arrivals surrendered their pasts, abandoned their birth names and slipped into fluid identities of Manson's design. Linda became Flower, Susan was reborn as Sadie. Hair was cut, possessions left behind, families back home all but erased from memory. Each ritual, from LSD-soaked evenings to feverish singing beneath the high desert moon, reinforced the idea that the family was all that mattered, the only force worth allegiance. On the ranch, daily life teetered between careless freedom and sharp discipline. Chores had to be completed, but only at Manson's command. Food was often meager and shared unevenly, except for Manson, who always received the largest portion. He controlled the music, the schedule, even the intimacy between followers, pairing and separating them according to shifting whims. Punishments for minor insubordination could be cruel. Humiliation in front of the group, banishment into the desert for a night, a lingering threat of violence always lurking beneath the brotherly exterior. Despite this, for many, the family's sense of unity felt intoxicating. Evenings brought jam sessions around the campfire, wild dancing beneath the stars, and cathartic releases that, for a moment, made the ugliness of the world outside disappear. Newcomers, especially young women, were greeted with overwhelming affection and the shared reassurance that they had finally been seen. For some, life before the family had been a chain of betrayals. Now, each smile, each embrace, and every whispered secret knitted them further into the tribe, and further under Manson's control. There was a ritualistic aspect to their days, waking up with the sun, gathering for meditation as the chill morning air swept the canyons, listening for Manson to decree the group's plans. They shared not only food and beds, but dreams and wounds. Manson reinforced their outsider status, often telling them, "The world doesn't want you, but you belong here." That message, repeated day after day, transformed the family into a closed system, a feedback loop immune to the world's logic. Trust within the family depended on total loyalty to Manson, and on mutual suspicion of outsiders. Everyone recounted stories of abandonment or cruelty by mainstream society, and the more isolated the family became, the more tightly they clung to one another. Manson would play favorites, sowing jealousy and competition, but also manufacturing moments of unity, convincing his flock they were chosen for a cosmic mission. As the group's paranoia deepened, even the few who doubted the mission found themselves powerless to break free, their independence steadily worn away by endless cycles of confession and reaffirmation. All the while, Manson himself remained enigmatic, sometimes vanishing for hours, claiming to meet with shadowy benefactors in Hollywood, returning with cryptic tales of conspiracies and secret signs. His absences only grew the mythos surrounding him, and on his return, the family would hang on every word, eager for direction or absolution. He shaped his followers with a combination of tenderness, cruelty, and relentless storytelling. Sometimes he'd cradle a weeping girl in his arms only to later berate her in front of the group or send her to perform some humiliating lesson. The line between healing and control became so blurred that many family members could no longer distinguish their own desires from Manson's. They called each other brother and sister, and for a time, the illusion of family felt real, perhaps more real than any they'd known. But it was a family forged in the desert heat of need and fantasy, its boundaries ever shifting to suit the moods of its leader. Some nights the group would pile in a battered bus and head for the city, singing and laughing as they drove down moonlit highways. And then someone would return silent, shell-shocked, forever changed. As summer deepened and the world around them grew more fractured, the fantasy began to sour. Stress, scarcity, and Manson's obsession with his own prophecy gradually turned the communal haven into an island of growing darkness. Whispers spread that one day, the family would be called upon to prove their loyalty, a loyalty that could demand any sacrifice, in the name of a world only Manson could see. And so they waited, caught between dread and devotion, each day drawing the knot tighter. In that dusty makeshift sanctuary, the lost and the desperate found shelter under the warped umbrella of prophecy and belonging. Many would never escape the hold of the family, or the grim legacy of the promises they once believed so fiercely. The Manson family in the end was a tragedy of desire and deception, a gathering of wounded souls led inexorably to the edge of an abyss they never truly saw coming. The mission that would immortalize the Manson family in infamy began under a sky devoid of mercy, an inky canvas stretched above Los Angeles where no star dared twinkle. If anyone in Hollywood's glimmering canyons had peered into the darkness, they might have sensed a shift in the air. A tension brewing, anxious and cold, swirling through palm trees and filtering past iron gates. Most of the city's elite slept on, cradled by illusions of invulnerability, but on this night, that comfort was about to be violently stripped away. The plan had unfurled in ragged whispers at Spawn Ranch, the family's dusty, half-feral home at the city's outskirts. Charles Manson's wild gaze traveled from one follower to the next, fixing on each until their doubts dissolved. His instructions pierced the haze of drugs and spiritual talk swirling around the old Western film set where they lived. Tonight, you would show the world what the family could do. It was not about revenge, nor money, he insisted. It was the beginning of helter-skelter, the chaos that Manson believed would soon engulf both them and the world outside. As the family prepared to leave, everything was ritual. Each movement, lacing their battered shoes, painting faces with nervous intent, arming themselves with knives, rope, and a heavy-caliber revolver, held a sense of grim ceremony. The group chosen for the task was a strange assembly. Tex Watson, Manson's trusted lieutenant, tall and eager to prove himself, Susan Atkins, feisty yet desperate for approval, Patricia Krenwinkel, unblinking in her devotion, and Linda Kasabian, newer to the family, whose nerves teetered between awe and terror. Manson, like a twisted maestro, did not go with them. Instead, his last words echoed, "Leave something witchy." They climbed into a battered Ford, the smell of dust and gasoline clinging to their clothes. The city rolled past in a blur, a landscape of promise, ambition and decadence fronted by neon and shadow. But for these four, the outside world no longer held meaning beyond what Manson had given it, a place of enemies, of falsehood, a world ready to burn. The silence in the car was heavy, punctuated only by Tex's clipped instructions, and the occasional tremor in Linda's breath. No one dared voice their doubts, not after weeks of preparation. Each subtle threat, every promise that their act would spark the revolution Manson had preached for so long. As they moved deeper into the heart of celebrity Los Angeles, the lights thickened, palm-lined boulevards giving way to ever grander gates and manicured walls. They passed beneath canopies of oleander and crepe myrtle, moonlight glimmering on glass and chrome. Every home they passed seemed fortress-like, but the one they sought lay at the crown of Cielo Drive, a modernist estate perched above the chaos, its windows aglow with the warmth of dreams the family could never claim for themselves. They parked a few hundred yards down the slope, engine ticking in the silence as the family members sat in frozen anticipation. Each of them grappled with tangled feelings, loyalty, dread, excitement, and a nauseating sense of inevitability. They had become experts in the art of convincing themselves that they were not criminal, but chosen, that what they were about to do held meaning far grander than mere violence. It was righteousness, spoken in Manson's parables and sermonized by the fires at Spawn Ranch. Tex led the way, his voice lowered and clipped, eyes wide with manic purpose. Above them the house gleamed, oblivious and inviting, promise and tragedy in a single silhouette. Shadows danced over the manicured lawns as they climbed, woven together by nerves and purpose. Each step was another betrayal of the world's order, a step deeper into Manson's fever dream. At the perimeter, a dark wire fence marked the boundary between two universes, the families, defined by deprivation and malice, and the privileged gleaming bubble of Hollywood. Scaling it took seconds. Even then, before tragedy, there was a chilling absence of sound, only the scuffle of shoes and the heaving of anxious breath. What occurred next would be dissected for decades, details spelled out in transcripts and memoirs, confessions offered and withheld. But in that moment their mission was simple and brutal. Move unseen, slip into the world of dreams and destroy it from within. Linda stayed at the edge, supposedly lookout, heart pounding with each shuddering second. The others, Tex, Susan and Patricia, moved like ghosts, finding a window left slightly ajar. A dog barked in the distance and then went silent. The entire hillside seemed to draw a breath, bracing for the violence to come. Inside the mansion, the air still held the warmth of companionship. Soft laughter, the clinking of glasses and the promise of tomorrow. But outside, with every tick of the clock, that warmth was being invaded by inevitability. The family slipped across the threshold, pulled inexorably onward by something larger than themselves. A prophecy perhaps, or the dark gravity of their leader's madness. Each room they passed was an intimate tableau of comfort and dreams. Half-empty cups by the sink, a trailed-off conversation, cushions askew on a couch. For a final moment the line between intruder and intruded on seemed blurred, the symmetry so perfect that the horror could almost have been a storybook told in reverse. Tex's voice, sharp and almost artificial in its command, cleaved the silence. "I am the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." What followed occurred in convulsive, feverish bursts, a ballet of terror. Victims startled in pajamas and sleep-thick days, desperate, wordless attempts at escape, the family cutting through the night with violence so raw that even they seemed momentarily stunned by the reality of it. The sounds, shouts, cries, hollow thuds, spiraled into the walls and the gardens, only to be swallowed by the unfeeling night. The brutality went far beyond intent. Susan and Patricia, emboldened or petrified, became separate from themselves, puppets dancing on the strings of a conviction they only half accepted. They saw their victims not as individuals, but as sacrifices for some future upheaval. Even as blood pooled and glass shattered, there was always a script, a twisted echo of the sermons Manson had burned into them. The violence was not random, it was ritual, reinforced each night at the ranch, now given grotesque physical form. Linda, frozen outside, could neither flee nor intervene. For her, each passing minute thudded like a drum of guilt, the sounds inside forever etched into her memory. She would later describe the horror as both distant, like a nightmare happening to strangers, and blindingly immediate, ripping the fabric of her own identity. Powerless, she was bound to the family by more than fear, by hope that obedience would secure her place in the new world Manson had promised. By the time it ended, a terrible quiet saturated the house. The family gathered themselves with trembling hands and wild, hollow eyes, adrenaline and disbelief mingling in the aftermath. Each tried and largely failed to rationalize what they'd done, that they were soldiers of fate, not butchers, that their actions spelled a new beginning, not damnation. The drive back to Spawn Ranch was long, silent, and surreal. Blood dried on clothes and under fingernails. Images flickered unbidden behind shut eyelids, flashes of fear, pleading, lives ended in an instant. Patricia gazed at the passing lights, trying to convince herself that Manson would see her differently now, that this act would earn the love and validation she'd never found at home. Susan repeated her leader's words, a mantra meant to drown out regret. Tex refused to look back, knowing already that whatever they had been before tonight, crossing the threshold of that home had made them something else entirely. When the battered Ford finally wheeled up the dusty road to Spawn Ranch, every member stepped out weighed down by the knowledge that the world, however unchanged on its surface, had been irretrievably shattered for those inside the house on Cielo Drive. The city, still restless and golden beneath the California night, moved on. But for the family, and for the country, a new kind of darkness had settled, one from which there would be no easy awakening. Inside the walls of that elegant Benedict Canyon home, Sharon Tate seemed to radiate a presence that was almost tangible, a gentle luminescence woven from beauty, grace, and the anticipation of new life. At just 26, Sharon had already experienced the highs and lows of Hollywood's unforgiving landscape, navigated the swirl of cameras and spotlights, and emerged as both adored and surprisingly grounded. She was more than just the wife of the famed director Roman Polanski. She was a force in her own right, talented, beloved, and now nearly 9 months pregnant with her first child, a dream she and Roman had both cherished after so many glittering, busy years. Those late summer nights had a certain softness to them in Los Angeles, but within the Tate-Polanski residence that particular evening, the air felt touched with something almost magical. The laughter was easy, her movements gentle but purposeful. Sharon, in a flowing cream-colored dress that caressed her curve of motherhood, moved through the softly lit rooms with the kind of tranquil assurance that only someone truly content could possess. The conversations around her ebbed and flowed, filled with the hopes and reminiscences of close friends who felt at home in her warmth. There was music, always music, soft jazz blending with laughter and the clink of glasses. In her presence anxieties seemed to ease. Her beauty, so often described as ethereal or otherworldly by those who met her, wasn't simply the product of perfect features or golden hair. It was the way she listened intently to each friend's story, the sparks of humor she used to lighten even the most anxious guest's spirit, the easy way she welcomed everyone into her circle. In recent weeks, as her pregnancy advanced, Sharon's aura seemed almost to intensify, as if the life growing inside her brightened the air itself. She spoke with a quiet excitement about the nursery she and Roman had been preparing, about dreams of first steps and baby's laughter echoing through these halls. She was writing tomorrow's hopes even as the world outside edged towards chaos. As she reclined on the velvet settee, a hand absently tracing the curve of her belly, Sharon glowed not just with health but with expectation, a sense that her journey into motherhood, in this moment, mattered more than any role she had ever inhabited on screen. She confided in her friends about the name she and Roman had chosen, recalled memories of her own childhood, and mused about the mysteries of the little soul she was days away from meeting. It was a still point in a swiftly turning world, an interlude of grace amid uncertainties. Sharon's laughter was soft, lilting, punctuated by moments of reflective silence as she looked around the room, grateful for this small island of peace. Yet for all her serenity there were flickers of worry too, those fears that touch any expectant mother, but also the ones unique to her world. Sharon carried on valiantly in Roman's absence, reassuring him by phone nightly, masking her own anxieties about their future, about the chaos occasionally swallowing the city's rhythm. But the friends gathered tonight, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, Jay Sebring, helped form a shield of camaraderie and protection. She drew comfort from their presence, each of them orbiting in their own way around her, eager for news, offering playful advice, and sometimes simply holding space when her exhaustion crept in. There was a profound sense that this house, for all its Hollywood trappings, had become a cocoon, fragile but fiercely cherished. Late in the evening, Sharon found herself by the nursery window, bathed in the silver spill of moonlight, cradling her stomach while her thoughts raced through possibilities and prayers. Would she be a good mother? Would Roman make it home in time? Was it possible to raise a family in a world that sometimes lurched from radiant joy to shadowy fear without warning? For every happy answer, a silent worry followed, but Sharon was determined. Hers would be a household animated by love and the promise of better tomorrows. As the hours slipped by and the party quieted, Sharon felt the swirl of sleepy satisfaction. She listened to her friends speaking softly down the hall, the gentle hum of their voices a lullaby in itself. She adjusted a vase of white lilies, her favorites, on the mantel, absently aligning their stems. Every gesture tonight seemed etched with a sense of heightened presence, of gratitude for the calm, of resolve in the face of an unseen storm brewing beyond the gates of Cielo Drive. She was unaware, of course, of the darkness gathering at the city's edge, the winds that would soon rattle windows and the footsteps that would tread sinister rhythms outside her door. For now, Sharon Tate was a vision of expectancy and light, cocooned in the warmth of friendship and the rarefied glow of impending motherhood. Her heart beat in time with hope. Whatever the world threatened to bring, inside this house, her spirit blazed ever brighter, unyielding, unbroken, the promise of life shining stubbornly through the night. To her friends it was impossible not to feel drawn toward Sharon's gentle energy. She was generous with affection and reminders of joy that, in her cheerful presence, felt so natural and lasting. Her laughter had a warmth to it, never forced, always genuine. Even as she gently chided Jay for fussing over her too much or shared a private joke with Abigail, there was a sparkling ease in the way she moved through their gathering. The anticipation of a new life didn't dampen her social spirit, but elevated it. Her happiness was infectious, buoying the entire group. The glow around her wasn't just about beauty or pregnancy. It was the rare, subtle brilliance of a woman who belonged wholly to herself, even amid endless demands for autographs, photographs, interviews. Guests always noted how Sharon had avoided the toxic competitiveness of Hollywood or the cynicism fame so often brought. She saw through masks, quick to comfort anyone who seemed troubled, and quick to laugh off slights that might have bruised a lesser spirit. Tonight, she nudged the needle of the record player, letting the music drift back in as she smoothed her hair and tucked a loose strand behind her ear. A small ritual, familiar and soothing. A server brought in a tray of midnight snacks, and Sharon made sure Abigail had her favorite tea, that Jay didn't pour himself another drink, that Wojciech felt included even as his mind wandered in and out of the foreign language conversations. Her empathy quietly bridged gaps between her guests. Pregnancy had only sharpened her caretaker's instincts. She asked for updates from friends, looked forward to baby advice, and gently laughed at her own inexperience, all with a grace that couldn't be faked. The house was alive with a kindness, almost maternal in its softness. Sharon rarely dwelled on danger. Still, there had been unsettling stories lately. Theft in the canyon, strange phone calls, neighbors gossiping about break-ins higher up the ridge. She joked about hiring a guard dog, and Roman had insisted on double-checking every lock before leaving for Europe. But inside the house the world seemed distant. Sharon's instinct was always to make her home feel safe, open, filled with comfort and beauty. Flowers in every room, fresh linens, candles flickering in crystal holders, small detail acts of protection against the stormy world outside. Even beneath her laughter, her eyes flashed with the strong-willed hope of someone determined to write her own happy ending. She wore the role of hostess with the confidence of an actress at the height of her craft, choreographing the night's flow, making sure no one felt left behind, not even herself. This simple but profound control over her environment was a shield against uncertainty. Sharon savored the familiar comforts, Abigail's gentle teasing, the old stories from Jay, the taste of lemonade spiked with a secret, giggle-inducing ingredient. Every moment shimmered with the possibility of new beginnings, and she held tight to that shimmer, refusing to cede to the underlying anxieties lurking behind the curtain of night. Before bed, Sharon lingered one last time in the nursery, softly painted, stocked neatly with plush toys, a wooden crib ready and waiting. She touched the tiny clothes Roman had picked out, stroked the mobile that would soon spin above a sleeping newborn. It was here, when no one else was watching, that her radiant confidence gave way to the vulnerable awe of impending motherhood. She whispered a quiet promise, half prayer, half dream, to the unborn child she already adored, that she would keep him safe, teach him kindness, let him feel the wonder of being wanted and loved. Her silhouette, for an instant, glowed in the moonlit nursery, a final tableau of hope glowing against the oncoming dark. Meanwhile, the night itself felt impossibly still, and Sharon's thoughts drifted easily between simple, quiet gratitude and the bright, relentless possibilities waiting ahead. She thumbed through a book of fairy tales meant for bedtime readings, imagining the wobbly giggle of a new baby filling the soon-to-be nursery, the soft footsteps of Roman returning from his travels to sweep them both into a joyous embrace. The images were impossibly vivid, the craving for the future almost electric. In those final moments before retreating to bed, Sharon pressed her palm to her belly one last time, feeling the slow, reassuring roll of life within, her breathing synchronized with her baby's muted movements, 2 heartbeats entwined beneath her ribs, the singular miracle that eclipsed all thoughts of fear, all shadows lurking beyond. She turned off the hallway lights, left a lamp glowing in the living room just in case one of the other guests felt restless in the middle of the night, and padded softly toward her own room. From the doorway, she caught a reflection of herself in the gilded mirror. Her familiar smile was calm, but her eyes sparkled with the promise of tomorrows she could almost touch. Sharon traced the arc of her belly again in the lamplight, savoring the quiet triumph of this ordinary evening, a love story still in progress. All the while, as sleep crept through the polished halls and the garden's heavy blooms drooped on their stems, neither Sharon nor her guests sensed the anxious, desperate energies assembling on the city's periphery. They knew nothing of the bitter fate closing in, nothing of the nightmare about to crash so violently into their fragile world. For one last set of hours at least, Sharon Tate remained suspended in her own delicate universe, where hope burned bright, where every new heartbeat felt like a benediction, and where the kindness she had sown nightly blossomed all around her even as darkness, steadily, prepared to claim the night. Inside that elegant house on Cielo Drive, Sharon Tate was not alone in her final hours. Abigail Folger, heiress to the vast Folger coffee fortune, was there as well, a woman whose quiet resolve and understated grace offered both complement and contrast to Sharon's glowing anticipation. On the surface, it was just another Hollywood evening, the privileged gathered behind manicured hedges, laughter glimmering beneath the soft chandelier light, and hearts safeguarded by the illusion that money and fame could stave off darkness. Abigail Folger was not merely a footnote to tragedy, she carried her own story, her own light, and her own anxieties. Raised in a world of immense wealth and expectation, she had traveled far to find a sense of purpose beyond her family's name. She was fiercely intelligent, thoughtful, and increasingly restless with the constraints of the life she'd inherited. In recent months, she'd thrown herself into volunteer work in Los Angeles, helping with social programs, tutoring children, and seeking human connections that transcended the privilege of her upbringing. Those efforts made her a grounding force in the house that night, a calm anchor amid the swirl of personalities and dreams. Sitting beside Sharon, Abigail exuded a gentle warmth. She was attentive to her pregnant friend's every need, soothing, preparing snacks, refilling glasses. Her laughter was melodic, her advice tinged with a pragmatism that came from seeing too many illusions fade over time. In every gesture you could sense someone trying to offer protection, to build, even if briefly, a safe space against the world's caprice. The gathering inside the Tate home included friends and confidants, each with their private triumphs and sorrows, yet together they created a tapestry of affection and shared history. Jay Sebring, the renowned hairstylist and still Sharon's close confidant despite their tangled romantic past. Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail's own companion, a Polish writer and adventurer haunted by old losses and new ambitions. There was easy camaraderie, stories of Europe, tales of film sets, laughter over half-remembered lines from old comedies. It was a night for forgetting any troubles, if only for a fleeting pause. Abigail's eyes would linger on Sharon every so often, her thoughts betraying a flip between admiration and concern. She envied in her way the clarity of Sharon's hope, the simplicity of her longing for family and new life. Abigail still struggled with her own sense of purpose, the dissonance between what she'd inherited and what she wanted to become. In the hush that sometimes fell over the living room, you might catch Abigail staring at the moonlit gardens, searching for answers in the bleak velvet night beyond those thick glass windows. The world outside was fraying at its seams. Even in their seclusion, shadows of unrest sometimes intruded, rumors of violence and civil chaos in the city, odd noises in the hills at night, anonymous phone calls that left everyone slightly more on edge. But inside, they pushed such worries aside, leaning into familiar rituals, music, favorite records spinning lazily on the player, cups of herbal tea cooling on polished tables. Abigail moved through the space with the quiet poise of someone raised to host but never quite at ease with the performance. She listened more than she spoke, offering gentle nudges to steer conversation away from anxiety back toward lighter things. An anecdote about her first disastrous driving lesson, sharp quips about European fashion, the latest literary gossip. When someone voiced a tentative fear, Abigail would brush it off with a reasoned calm, insisting, half believing, that nothing bad could touch them here, not tonight, not with so much goodness gathered under one roof. Beneath that ease, however, was a sensitivity to every shift in mood. Abigail noticed the way Sharon nervously tucked at her hair, the almost imperceptible way Jay watched the windows, the tension in Wojciech's jaw when conversation quieted. She was vigilant without being obvious, an inheritor not only of fortune, but of the invisible cares that wealth so often breeds. As the evening wore on, Abigail began tidying stray cups and plates, her hands moving methodically as if an ordered house could guarantee safety. She double-checked the back doors and windows, habits ingrained by years of stories about petty crime and Hollywood's peculiar dangers. Before long, she found herself beside Sharon again, sharing in a moment of tired laughter, and later, a few precious words about the future. In truth, Abigail was haunted by uncertainty. The privilege of her upbringing had shielded her from many realities, but it also trapped her in a persistent guilt, a sense that she was always borrowing from a world whose rules she both respected and resented. The very walls of the Tate house, sumptuous and serene, seemed at times to close in with that awareness, all the things that could not be controlled, all the happiness that, even at its height, was fleeting. On another night, in another world, perhaps Abigail might have lingered a little longer before leaving, listened more fully to the small voice inside her urging caution, or called her family just to hear the sound of distant, familiar voices. But on this night, with the echo of laughter still warm in her ears and the sweet smell of summer roses drifting through an open window, she chose hope over fear. She believed, as only the good-hearted can, that beauty and kindness might be enough to guard them from the world's persistent savagery. Abigail Folger remains a poignant figure in this tragedy, not just an heiress or a victim, but a reminder of how even the privileged are vulnerable, how attempts to create havens of peace can be undone in an instant by malice from the shadows. Her final hours were spent in sincere company, her gentle strength radiating outward, proof that compassion endures even when fate is merciless. For a brief time her presence was another shield in the house, a light that for that one last evening truly seemed like it could keep the darkness at bay. A hush so deep settled over the house that even the gentle breeze outside seemed afraid to disturb it. For a fleeting moment, time paused, caught between the flicker of a candle and the unwavering beat of fear, pulsing unseen somewhere in the bones of the old mansion. But then, the quiet fractured. It was a sound so soft that most would miss it, the faintest creak of a door giving way in the night, the delicate shuffle of rubber soles pressed carefully against the polished marble of the entryway. The family, those wayward disciples reshaped by Charles Manson's gospel, had breached the sanctuary. In those earliest seconds inside, nothing moved except the shadows, stretching long and gruesome across the hallways. Susan Atkins, called Sadie by those who adored her, led the way. Her hands, trembling but determined, gripped the handle of a knife with bone-white knuckles. Beside her, Tex Watson flexed and unflexed his fingers as though willing the hesitation from his bloodstream, his jaw set but his heart racing in wild, desperate surges. Patricia Krenwinkel, hair hanging around her face like a curtain, hovered just behind, casting sideways glances at the dark corners, as if expecting the walls to wake and rebuke their intrusion. Breathing became an exercise in stifling one's very existence. Each of them had rehearsed this moment countless times, not the specific choreography of where to place a foot or how to open a window silently, but the surrendering of conscience that came before the act itself. Manson's words echoed in their minds, It's just another night. It's them or us. The world needs to be shown. Logic no longer belonged to them. Morality had been traded for blind devotion. The interior glowed with an invitation the family had never known, a display of gentle luxury, pink-tinged lamplight, the trace of expensive perfume beneath the tang of fear accumulating in their throats. In the hush of the corridor the family moved like ghosts, summoned by need and prophecy alike, eyes hollow with anticipation, and hands already slicked with the sweat of responsibility. The responsibility to fulfill the mission entrusted by their Messiah. At this hour, the world within the house was neither awake nor entirely asleep. There was the soft static hum of a television somewhere, muffled laughter trailing down from the living room, perhaps the shuffling of a guest seeking water in the kitchen. None of the inhabitants could have imagined their last moments would be punctuated by the shuddering sound of silent invaders threading through the hall, all empathy drained from their faces, masks in service of a terrible ritual. Every member of the family acted according to the script Manson had written, each performance choreographed not in practiced gestures, but in the withering away of personal guilt. They became instruments, cold, obedient, and detached. No longer individuals, they were fragments of a single, feverish intent. Tex was the voice, Sadie the echo, Patricia the shadow. The air thickened as they fanned out, moving past the faint light slicing through the gap beneath a door, closing around the house's inhabitants like a noose tightening with every silent footstep. Outside, the world spun ceaselessly, oblivious to the storm brewing on this remote hillside. Cars trickled by on far-off roads, neighbors dreamt innocently in their beds, and the city's pulse thudded steadily into the night. But in this space, the family had seized control of fate, hijacking the house's heartbeat and filling it with dread. Linda Kasabian, left to stand watch near the road, froze as she strained to listen, hearing nothing but her own pulse, her mind torn between hope and horror. She was meant to be the lookout, the witness to the act she could neither stop nor condone. Her breath fluttered as the smallest whimper or creak from inside became a thunderous accusation. She clutched the cold post of the fence, feeling the vibration of each scream even before it pierced the night. Inside the mansion the family moved as one entity, a multi-limbed shadow advancing through opulent rooms that seemed suddenly frail and unguarded. A dropped slipper lay forgotten at the foot of the staircase, innocent, ordinary, and now tragic in its stillness. In the master bedroom, Sharon Tate stirred, a dream evaporating in the face of some nameless anxiety. In the guest rooms, soft sighs and shifts spoke of peaceful sleep, the kind that only comes when one is certain the world outside cannot intrude. Tex Watson's steps were purposeful, but his mind was a turbulence of fragments. Manson's voice, the faces of his victims not yet seen, the sound of his own breathing growing shallow with each stride closer to the rooms where life, real, vibrant life, awaited annihilation. Sadie and Patricia occupied the stairwell, pressing their bodies flat against the wall when a distant door creaked open. Their knives glinted, reflecting phantom lights off crystal vases and gilt-edged frames. They knew the choreography, swift, silent, decisive. A dog barked downstairs, then fell silent, sensing perhaps what no human could yet perceive. In the split second before chaos broke, there was only the distant hum of Los Angeles nightlife, the gentle rustle of curtains, the scent of lilies floating on the air from Sharon's cherished bouquet. The family pressed on. Each hallway became a corridor of judgment. Sadie's quick, shallow breaths fogged the cool glass of a display cabinet as she slid past, thinking not of her own past, but of the future she'd been promised, a kingdom built on obedience and blood. She caught Patricia's gaze, a flicker of fear, quickly snuffed out by the brutality of necessity. Their mission was grotesque, but it was entirely theirs. When the family found their first target, a guest, barely awake, confusion thick in his eyes, Tex's words were ritualistic, rehearsed. "I am the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business," he announced with a fractured certainty that chilled the room and sealed the fate of all within. There was no argument, no mercy, only the sickening crescendo of violence that shattered the last defenses of peace. The brutality unfolded in bursts, bodies lunged, knives flashed, desperate hands reached out for impossible help. Screams, smothered and terrified, ricocheted off marble and glass. In less than a minute the essence of home became the stage for brutality, scripted by delusion. Sharon Tate, heavy with child, emerged from her bedroom, confusion morphing into terror as she registered both the presence of strangers and the shifting, unreal tableau in her living room. Her voice, a cry part agony, part plea, rose above the soundscape of horror, echoing a hope that someone, somewhere might intervene. Her friends' voices joined hers, each rooted in a primal need to protect, to understand, to survive. But the family, awash in adrenaline and feverish devotion, offered no answer except the cold certainty of their mission. Elsewhere in the house, Abigail Folger and the others reacted with similar disbelief, clutching at hope, searching for exits, voices trembling with confusion. Their resistance, though desperate, was doomed by the element of surprise and the sheer force of the family's conviction. Every slipper, every spilled cup, every upturned rug marked the passage from innocence to trauma. The perpetrators, in the throes of violence, struggled to remain detached, as though this horror was not of their making but rather the inevitable consequence of some higher command. Tex barked orders, urging speed but also paradoxically savoring the terror, the sense of being at the very eye of a storm, conjured by their own hands. Sadie's knife moved with a mechanical certainty, her gaze darting across faces for some signal that it might be time to stop, but there was none. Only forward, deeper into the nightmare, the world falling away until only blood and breath remained. From room to room, the family carved a jagged pathway of devastation. The ornate carpets became patchwork with fear and chaos, trails of crimson staining ivory threads. The walls that once held laughter and music now absorbed cries that would haunt them for years. In the heart of this maelstrom, objects of beauty, frescoes, family portraits, delicate china, stood as mute witnesses to a night that tore apart the boundary between sanctuary and terror. On the edge of it all, Linda Kasabian remained outside. She could see only hints of movement through gauzy curtains, a shadow falling, a lamp crashing. Every beat of her heart was accompanied by the knowledge that her role was both integral and powerless. To not sound the alarm, to neither participate nor rescue, to be haunted eternally as a silent link in the chain of destruction. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the passenger window. The sound within the house was muffled but unmistakable. It was the end of something sacred. With the family's purpose fulfilled, though nothing resembling peace followed, the group retreated. The carefully orchestrated silence that marked their entrance became a scramble of panicked, bloodied departure. Tex, Sadie, Patricia, all wordless now, vacant-eyed, slipped back into the shadows, their bodies marked by memory and violence. The air behind them was raw with the scent of fear and the agony of innocence lost. In the aftermath, time seemed to stutter. For those left even fleetingly, their final thoughts flickered with disbelief. How had their sanctuary been breached? How had an ordinary evening filled with laughter and warmth been shattered forever? Yet for the family, as they disappeared into the ink-black night, numbness gave way to an empty soul-sick flourish, part pride, part horror at what they had done. The house so recently alive became a sepulchre. Gentle breezes still curled through the broken panes, stirring curtains that would never again frame such innocence. In the hours to come, this place would become a crime scene, a riddle for detectives and a wound on the soul of the city. But in that interlude between cruelty and consequence, the family's fleeting triumph echoed as a curse, settling into the bones of the house, forever a reminder of the moment when evil slipped so effortlessly past the threshold. What haunted most was the silence that followed, the profound, unnatural quiet that blanketed the home and all within it. Outside, the first gold of dawn was still distant, and the world spun on oblivious, but inside nothing would ever be the same. The family became phantoms once more, leaving terror and tragedy in their wake, their chilling obedience written across one of the darkest nights in Hollywood's history. The unimaginable tragedy unfolded at an unrelenting pace, shattering the fragile illusion of safety that had wrapped the home just moments earlier. In less than the span of a breath, 5 innocent lives were mercilessly taken, a horror so absolute that any chance for comprehension or escape seemed to dissolve into the California night. The violence came swift and bewildering, without pattern or mercy, each act a thunderbolt unleashed from the storm of chaos Charles Manson had conjured in the minds of his followers. Inside the house, the sudden eruption of terror erased all boundaries between sanctuary and nightmare. Sharon Tate, so recently glowing with expectancy and dreams of motherhood, now faced a reality that barely seemed possible. A waking nightmare of pleading voices, desperate movements, and hearts hammering with hope for deliverance that would not come. The shock in her eyes reflected the disbelief shared by all those present. This was not supposed to happen, not in this haven of comfort and light. The delicate, anticipatory plans for the future, baby names, gatherings, laughter, were violently displaced by the mindless brutality that swept through the rooms. Abigail Folger, so composed and steady in her friendships, found herself thrown into pandemonium. Her intellectual calm, so often a balm to others, was overpowered by waves of primal fear. She tried to offer words of peace, perhaps to mediate, to find logic, but the madness of the moment annihilated conversation. Desperation replaced reason as she searched for exits, for something to shield her friends, to no avail. In those final seconds, snippets of childhood, memories of safety, and longing for one last reassuring embrace from someone she loved may have flashed behind her eyes. Nearby, Wojciech Frykowski fought back with every ounce of courage he could muster. He was strong and determined, refusing to submit despite the violence that engulfed them all. Every action, every attempt at resistance was a cry against the darkness, each desperate effort echoing through the vast house only to be swallowed by its indifferent silence. Jay Sebring, ever the protector, leapt into the fray to defend Sharon, to put himself between harm and hope. Yet the scale of the violence, the sheer conviction of the family, rendered heroic gestures tragically powerless. The attackers moved through the house as if enacting some grim, predetermined ritual, directed by voices outside themselves. Their eyes betrayed not rage, but emptiness, a vacant devotion to a perverted cause that left no room for empathy or second thoughts. Tex Watson acted swiftly, barking chilling commands. Susan Atkins and Patricia Krenwinkel followed the script with mechanical relentlessness. Each carried out their role in the assault, hands shaking at first before finding grim steadiness. Their victims, close enough to touch, seemed to slip away into shadow, their pleas lost upon unsympathetic ears. The briefest attempts at reasoning with the intruders failed, words a meaningless currency in the face of such derangement. Even as life left the victims, there was a profound sense of disbelief in the air. How could a gathering defined by love, hope, and new beginnings unravel so swiftly into devastation? The very walls that had embraced golden laughter and friendship now bore silent witness to agony. Blood pooled on tile and carpet that had once felt the steps of bright-eyed, dreaming artists. The cruelty of the moment was magnified by its contrast against such beauty, the soft glow of the lamps, the pastel baby clothes waiting in the crib, the unfinished cups of tea, the records stilled on the turntable. The commotion faded as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a silence that rang louder than screams. Every person present was transformed in those moments, some into martyrs, others into monsters, and still others, like Linda Kasabian waiting outside and powerless, into lifelong witnesses to a horror they could never have foreseen. To those few who survived, time became elastic. Seconds stretched into eternities, details seared indelibly into memory, a scream cut short, a pleading whisper, the fleeting clutch of a hand in the darkness. In the aftermath, the house itself felt haunted, its corners heavy with unanswered questions and the echoes of unfulfilled dreams. The outside world, oblivious to the horrors within, continued for a while in ignorance. Neighbors remained unaware, night traffic drifted by, and the city's pulse beat on as usual. But within those walls, innocence had been lost. The tragedy left a wound not just in the fabric of Hollywood, but in the culture's perception of safety, community, and the fragility of happiness. As morning crept toward the edge of the hills, the first light did nothing to dispel the shadows inside. 5 bright threads had been violently severed from the tapestry of their world, their stories ending not with the gentle closure of sleep, but with a cruelty that defied understanding. The legacy of that night would echo unbidden and eternal through generations as a reminder of how quickly grace can be undone, and how even the strongest bonds of friendship and hope may be rendered helpless before the storm of madness. The terror was unthinkable, the loss beyond measure. In one fevered night, the world learned how close the edge of the abyss truly can be. Sharon Tate's departure from this world was marked by a heartbreak more profound than words could ever capture. In the early morning hours, with her life and the life of her unborn child brutally stolen, the world lost more than just a rising star. It lost a mother's hope, an artist's promise, and a spark of youthful innocence that could never be replaced. The nursery Sharon had so lovingly prepared would never witness the sounds of a newborn's cry. Her soft lullabies were silenced before they could ever comfort the tiny soul she had carried for so many months. Those who survived, their bodies untouched but their spirits forever wounded, would carry with them the weight of that moment for the rest of their days. Outside the glare of police sirens and the ceaseless cameras deep in the marrow of Hollywood itself, lingered a grief so fierce that even legends quaked beneath its touch. The community recoiled, not only at the loss of Sharon but at the cruel theft of futures and dreams. The sheer senselessness haunted everyone, friends, family, colleagues, and strangers who had followed her career with admiration. Sharon's husband, Roman Polanski, was worlds away when the nightmare unfolded. Yet upon learning the fate that had befallen his beloved wife and child, his cries echoed through continents, raw, bitter, refusing to be stilled by time or distance. For days, Los Angeles seemed veiled in subdued disbelief, the pace of life slowed by collective sorrow. The press circled like vultures, but inside the hearts of those closest to Sharon, grief was a private, endless wail. It reverberated in phone calls left unanswered, in letters never to be read, in gifts set aside for birthdays and baby showers that would never come. For her closest friends, the companions of that ill-fated night, and those who would come to mourn her in the days after. The pain was tangled with memories of Sharon's laughter, her gentle optimism, and the almost magical way she had of turning any room into a sanctuary. They remembered the glow in her eyes as she spoke about motherhood, the easy warmth of her touch, her habit of checking in with everyone around her to make sure they felt seen and valued. Those final weeks were filled with quiet anticipation. Decorations chosen for the nursery, a favorite lullaby selected, soft pastel outfits folded lovingly away, all the signposts of hope, now transformed into monuments of loss. The echoes of Sharon's absence did not fade quickly. At her memorial service beneath the pale California sun, the crowd ranged from Hollywood's brightest stars to the quietest friends. Some wept openly, others clung to silence, clutching flowers and photographs. The city paused, even the ever-busy studios seemed to dim their lights to mark the moment. On movie sets and in editing rooms, in cafes and along sunlit boulevards, people spoke in hushed tones about Sharon, her talent, her grace, her kindness, her dazzling yet unassuming presence. But it was not just those who knew Sharon personally who felt the impact. The tragedy marked a rupture in the collective psyche of Hollywood itself. No longer did the city seem invincible or untouched by tragedy. The streets that once glittered with possibility felt unnervingly hollow, shadowed by the knowledge that even the brightest futures could be snuffed out in a heartbeat. Sharon's image, forever frozen in youthful radiance, became an emblem of unrealized dreams, an icon repeatedly returned to in retrospectives, documentaries, and quiet conversations among those who remembered her. For the public, Sharon's loss was more than an entertainment headline. It became something mythic, a whispered reminder of the fragility of joy. Fans left bouquets and handwritten notes outside her home, some strangers, some lifelong admirers who felt in her story the sudden cold intrusion of fate. The tabloids rehashed every brutal detail, but true grief lived elsewhere, in the final sonograms, the unopened nursery, the laughter that would never again grace a dinner table. Those who survived Sharon, her mother, her sisters, her friends, would spend years battling both the weight of loss and the burden of the public's fascination. Some found strength in charity, channeling their sorrow into meaningful work. Others retreated, unwilling to face the constant reminders. Yet for all of them, memory was a double-edged gift, filled with joy that she once lived and agony that she was gone too soon. Hollywood's memory is notoriously fickle, but Sharon Tate's story refused to fade. New generations discovered her films and her photographs, finding in her gentle eyes a reflection of their own hopes and vulnerabilities. Documentaries sought to explain what went wrong, but the true wound, why such light was extinguished, would remain raw, unanswerable. Sharon became both a cautionary tale and a sainted symbol, not merely a victim, but a beacon, lighting up the perennial question of how dreams both soar and shatter in the uncertain spotlight of fame. For those who paused outside the famed gates of Cielo Drive in the years and decades to follow, there was a palpable hush, a sensation that the very air hummed with the echoes of a life and a promise destroyed. Each June brought fresh tributes, and every mention of Sharon's name invited not only sorrow but also a determination to remember her for all that she embodied. A spirit unbowed, a future unwritten, a kindness that, for a time, brought light to even the darkest of Hollywood's nights. In the end, the true tragedy was not only that Sharon Tate never got to cradle the child she longed for, but that the city she helped to illuminate would forever be haunted by the softness of her light, extinguished far too soon. Through the stories told and the tears shed, her legacy became an elegy for innocence, one that continues to echo, softer than a lullaby, but never truly silent in the restless heart of Hollywood. The nightmare unleashed by the Manson family carved an irreversible scar into the fabric of America's entertainment industry, a wound that refused to fade, haunting generations for decades after the horror on Cielo Drive. For Hollywood, a place defined by dreams, beauty, and illusion, the brutality that arrived on that muggy August night in 1969 shattered what little separation existed between the worlds of fantasy and reality. No longer could stars or dreamers assume immunity from the darkness lurking beyond spotlights and velvet ropes. In the aftermath, the city pulsed with a collective sense of dread. News of the murders blitzed through morning headlines, the faces of the victims splayed across newspapers and TV screens. The myth of Hollywood's invulnerability was punctured in the most violent public way possible. For actors, directors, producers, and fans alike, the story was more than a gruesome crime. It was an insult to the very idea that art and success could protect against senseless evil. The fear seeped into daily life. Security systems were upgraded, gates were locked, bodyguards hired for even the most mundane errands. But the deepest change was not physical. It was psychological, a lingering anxiety that for many in the entertainment world never quite faded. Parties lost their carefree edge. Scripts written afterwards seemed tinged with an unspoken acknowledgement of vulnerability. Stars who once reveled in open houses and spontaneous gatherings now looked over their shoulders, warier about fame's double-edged sword. Creative communities found their conversations shifting, preoccupied by the question, if even Sharon Tate and her friends could become targets, was anyone truly safe? The crime carried aftershocks far beyond Los Angeles. Across America and the world, the Manson murders became both a sensational headline and a twisted fable passed between generations. Film sets were hushed by superstitious dread. Directors invoked the memory of the tragedy to discipline rowdy extras or enforce curfews. At Oscar parties, whispers of "the family" were shared like urban legends, reminders that the strangers next door might not be as benign as they seemed. There was a surreal, unspoken understanding that the boundaries between celebrity and tragedy had been irrevocably blurred. For the families of the victims and for survivors, the trauma was endless. Hollywood, with all its resources and resilience, could not erase the memory of blood-stained dreams or comfort those haunted by horrific loss. Every headline, every re-release of one of Sharon Tate's films, every documentary or retelling of the murders, risked reopening wounds still tender decades later. The survivors' voices grew at times defiant and at times weary, as they pleaded for audiences to look beyond the morbid thrill and see the humanity, the promise, cut down in a single night. The notoriety of the Manson family also triggered a cultural reckoning. Artists, writers, and filmmakers mined the subject again and again, sometimes searching for answers, oftentimes only finding more disturbing questions. Why had these young people, many of them ordinary, unremarkable before meeting Charles Manson, committed such unimaginable acts? How could someone as charismatic as Manson twist so many lives to his will? Was evil something born or made? Manson's own image, wild-eyed and ranting from behind bars, became a grotesque counterpoint to the glamour he'd destroyed. He was mythologized and demonized in equal measure, inspiring films, books, and songs that oscillated between fascination and revulsion. Some artists tried to exorcise the city's pain by reenacting the violence on screen, hoping through repetition and exposure to lessen its grip on the collective unconscious. For others, the tale was a warning, a reminder that beneath Hollywood's seductive shimmer waited forces unconcerned with talent, legacy, or innocence. In the decades that followed, the very word Manson became shorthand for everything that could go wrong when fame, ideology, and fractured souls collided. Even as new generations arrived, glossy-eyed and optimistic, hoping for their own Oscar moment, the shadow of the family loomed just out of sight. Occasionally an old starlet or reclusive producer would refer back to '69 as the moment Hollywood lost its innocence, recalling how the air in the hills was forever changed, less sweet, less safe, heavier with secrets. When anniversaries of the tragedy arrived, fans and journalists made pilgrimages to the old haunts, Cielo Drive, the Spahn Ranch ruins, the graveyards where young lives were prematurely laid to rest. Flowers were placed at the gate, tributes written in lipstick and left for ghosts who had never asked for such notoriety. In interviews, those who still remembered would fall silent at the mention of Manson, faces betraying a fatigue that outlasted the news cycle. The Hollywood sign remained unchanged, still bright against the canyon sky, But for many, it took on a second meaning, a symbol marking not only aspiration and fantasy, but also the inescapable cost of standing too long in the glare of the world's attention. For every red carpet, there was now an echoing question: at what price glory, and who would ultimately pay it? The legacy of August 1969 reminded all who walked the boulevards of broken dreams that fame could never buy immunity from chaos, nor could it ever truly mend a heart shattered by violence. Thus, the stain left by the Manson family proved indelible. It haunted not just the stars, but the millions who looked to Hollywood for hope, wonder, and escape. The nightmare didn't end with a verdict or a sentence served. It lingered in the shadows of every opening night, every hush at the end of a party, every artist's silent prayer that the ghosts of tragedy might, one day, let the city dream without fear again. Throughout the 20th century, certain crimes have sunk so deeply into the American psyche that they eclipse their status as mere criminal cases, taking on lives of their own, haunting, maddening, and strangely compelling every generation that rediscovers them. Among all those tragic and enigmatic stories, two stand at the forefront: the chilling murder of Elizabeth Short, forever immortalized as the Black Dahlia, and the nightmarish rampage led by the Manson family that ended the lives of Sharon Tate and her friends. These incidents linger not because they're solved or understood, but because they seem to defy resolution, teasing and tormenting those who try to pin down their truth. The Black Dahlia case, dating back to 1947, remains a dark mirror held up to post-war Los Angeles. Elizabeth Short, a hopeful young woman chasing stardom, vanished and was later found brutally murdered in a vacant lot, her body mutilated in a manner so grotesque that even seasoned detectives were shaken to their core. The horror was not just in the act, but in the city's morbid reaction, the fevered press, the speculation, the scores of suspects and confessions that led nowhere. Decades later, with mountains of theories and a library's worth of fiction and film inspired by the case, her story persists as an unsolvable puzzle. Hellened by noir authors and filmmakers alike, the Black Dahlia endures as Los Angeles's original heartbreaking riddle, an elegy for beauty lost to darkness, forever just out of reach. Then, in the summer of 1969, another wound was carved open in Hollywood's history. When news broke of the murders on Cielo Drive, Americans were gripped by a terror that felt almost mythic. Unlike the Dahlia mystery, the Manson saga unfolded in live color, splashed across every newspaper and television screen. Viewers watched in real time as once peaceful hippie ideals twisted into something bizarre and monstrous. The deaths of Sharon Tate and her friends were made even more unfathomable by their apparent randomness and resemblance to a doomsday cult's grotesque theater. The Manson family fancied themselves actors in a prophecy of their own making, but the horror felt all too real. What links both crimes, binding them in the lore of American darkness, is less the details and more the endless appetite they inspire. Theories and suspects multiply with every passing decade: corrupt police, deranged strangers, secret Hollywood cabals, unsolved clues hidden in film reels or old tabloids. Each new documentary, memoir, or movie claims to offer the breakthrough, the letter that explains everything, the confession that finally rings true. And yet with each retelling the murk deepens. The truth, if it exists, seems to float forever in the fog of rumor and emotional need. Writers find themselves trapped by these stories. To chronicle the Black Dahlia or the Manson case is to navigate a labyrinth, one where every passage could lead to revelation or dead end. Even as forensic technology evolves and suspects are dug up and cross-examined anew, the crimes never entirely relinquish their secrets. There's a cruelty in the way the real people at their center, Elizabeth Short, Sharon Tate, have almost become archetypes. Martyrs to a city's hunger for stories, icons for every writer or filmmaker desperate to conjure meaning from chaos. Their memories are both fiercely guarded and compulsively reimagined, a paradox that keeps resolution forever at arm's length. Hollywood itself has never truly escaped the shadow of these cases. Their fingerprints are everywhere: classic noir cinema, true crime bestsellers, metaphoric homages, and countless thrillers. The Black Dahlia's allure lies in her anonymity. She exists almost entirely in photographs and newspaper articles, a cipher for the era's beauty and despair. By contrast, the Manson murders were committed against recognizable figures, with the killers captured, their motives and madness dissected for a horrified world. Yet after all the confessions and courtroom drama, the fundamental why remains elusive. Why this brutality? Why so public? Why these specific victims? Why did so many lives spiral so quickly from dream to nightmare? It's this very sense of endless mystery and brutality that keeps the stories vital. Each era finds a new angle, psychological studies blaming parental neglect, pop sociologists citing a culture of obsession, cultural critics arguing that Hollywood itself breeds these tragedies. In truth, their appeal to storytellers is primal and unnerving. A forbidden peek into how violence shatters the promise of a hopeful life, and a challenge to the facade of glamour and invulnerability often projected by the city of stars. For filmmakers and writers, the test is twofold: how to honor the story without exploiting the pain, and how to approach the subjects without falling into cliché or sensationalism. The Black Dahlia and the Manson murders are cautionary tales but also invitations to self-doubt, to admit that some truths might never be unearthed, that some stories aren't puzzles to solve but wounds to reckon with. Trying to pin them down only seems to scatter the light further, reflecting back 100 contradictory visions of Los Angeles, at times golden and hopeful, at others broken and haunted. And so the legends remain. To this day, the names Black Dahlia and Manson conjure feelings that words can't quite encompass: fear, sorrow, fascination, and a sense of unfinished business. The writers and filmmakers who return again and again to these crimes do so not just to chase answers, but to wrestle with the fact that some darkness lives beyond explanation. The Black Dahlia and Sharon Tate, each in their own way, are modern sphinxes, irresistible, beautiful, and forever keeping their secrets, challenging the world to look beneath the glitter and see what shadows lurk behind the lights. In the years after these tragedies, literary and cinematic minds have continued returning to them, mining the overlap of myth and reality for new ways to interpret, or simply endure, their weight. The Black Dahlia's case inspired not only scores of pulp novels and neo-noir films, but spawned entire subgenres of American Gothic, where cities themselves become dangerous, secretive characters. The looming mystery allowed storytellers to pour their own anxieties into the vacuum. Fear of the unknown, suspicion of authority, the idea that evil itself can sometimes be shapeless, motiveless, unfathomable. With the Manson killings, however, the fascination turned even more self-reflective. Here the monsters did not lurk only outside the velvet rope, they lived in communes, worked on the fringes, and preyed on the lost dreams generated by Hollywood itself. Countless filmmakers, Roman Polanski, Quentin Tarantino, David Fincher among them, have dissected the cases from every angle. As a rupture of the 60s utopian vision, as an allegory for the American media's thirst for sensation, as a morality play about innocence corrupted by a hunger for fame and belonging. Part of what keeps these real-life legends alive isn't just the crimes themselves but everything they symbolize. The Black Dahlia stands for the dark side of aspiration, the price paid by those seeking transformation or escape, the risk a young woman faces in a city that promises glory and delivers indifference. The Manson family, on the other hand, exposes the dangers lurking beneath communal ideals, how easily hope can mutate into fanaticism, and how a seductive leader can weaponize broken hearts for unspeakable acts. What is rarely said out loud is that these cases have never really left the American conscience because they force difficult questions. How well do we truly know each other? Is our desire for narrative closure, clean answers, good motives, dramatic resolution, doomed to fail in the face of true, senseless suffering? Each retelling in novel or documentary or forbidden rumor only magnifies the sense of loss and confusion. In some ways, these mysteries persist because on a subconscious level we want them to. They provide the scaffolding upon which we hang our worries about trust, innocence, and the unpredictable nature of evil in ordinary lives. For every artist who has tried to make sense of these unsolvable cases, there's another who has accepted them as fables. Grim reminders that the world, especially the world promised by Hollywood, isn't always as bright as it seems. They haunt us precisely because they resist explanation. Some truths, like the faces of Elizabeth Short and Sharon Tate, seem fated to float forever at the edge of understanding, beautiful, unfinished, and impossible to forget. That night wasn't just the end of innocent laughter on a Hollywood hilltop, it marked the beginning of an era where fear threaded itself through every velvet curtain and red carpet. For the artists, the writers, the filmmakers who gave America its dreams, the sanctuary of Tinseltown would never be the same. No longer was Hollywood a mythic place where possibility outshone reality, where stars twinkled far above the ordinary dangers of the world. After that night, a chill settled over every opening night and wrap party. the understanding that darkness could pierce even the brightest illusions. For many, the aftershocks weren't simply tabloid fodder, they became a deep, crawling anxiety. Actors who once left their doors unlocked grew suspicious, looking over their shoulders on the studio lot, or hiring security details for the first time. Fancy hillside mansions that symbolized aspiration took on a new symbolism, fortresses guarding against invisible threats. Conversations at industry gatherings now turned, inevitably, to safety measures, to rumors about strangers lurking in the hills, to whispered shared trauma. Directors and producers, typically so hungry for scandalous inspiration, felt this pain as something different, a raw exposure that shattered the protective mystique their industry thrived on. Scripts began to splinter, more thrillers emerging from the writers' rooms, more psychological horror making its way onto screens. The lines between fiction and reality seemed to blur as screenwriters worked through their own anxieties, not just entertaining but seeking some measure of catharsis for a wounded community. This shift went far beyond movie sets and celebrity mansions. The general public, once enchanted by the idea that Hollywood was a kind of American Olympus, saw the city's golden mythology tarnished overnight. Suddenly, the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary dissolved. Terror was not only the province of distant wars or city streets, but had come home, seeping into the places where dreams were made and sold. Parents who once cheered their children's acting ambitions now thought twice. The press called it the death of the 60s, of innocence, of faith in the fundamentally benign order that Hollywood once promised. The tragedy didn't just haunt late-night talk radio and magazine covers, it wormed its way into the texture of American culture. People watched the news with a new rigor, seeking patterns, hunting for explanations. Doors were triple locked, curtains stayed tightly drawn. Behind the scenes, a subtle transformation reshaped the pulse of Hollywood. Studios reconsidered casting calls and late shoots. Actors commuted in guarded convoys. For every new hopeful clutching a small suitcase and a script, there existed a counterpoint of worry. The knowledge that destiny in LA might be shaped equally by luck and by threat. Some in the industry withdrew, building worlds behind hedges and bodyguards. Others leaned into their art even more fiercely, determined to spin beauty and catharsis from the shadow. Yet, in the midst of all this, Hollywood didn't just become a city under siege, it adapted, grew sharper. Its stories turned reflective. Blockbusters of the next decade often centered around shattered innocence, lost communities, or the monstrous lurking within paradise. Directors, once content to merely entertain, began to dissect the forces that threatened collective safety. With every haunted mansion flick and true crime biopic, they refracted the trauma of that infamous summer through celluloid, hoping the sharing of fear might dilute its power. Downtown, tourists still came, but their photos framed the city differently. No longer just a pilgrimage for fame and fortune, Hollywood became a crossroads. Light and dark coexisting, fortune's grin edged with a shadow. The very idea of celebrity took on new layers, no longer invulnerable but painfully, intricately human. Actors who had once seemed untouchable opened up about their frailties, their nightmares, their need for protection in an unsteady world. This breakdown of the old mythos allowed new stories, more honest, more haunted, often more beautiful in their candor, to emerge. In the years that followed, each LA nightfall seemed charged with the memory of that turning point. Spotlights swept the sky at big premieres, but for many, echoes of the past still whispered from the canyons and winding roads. Homes filled with laughter and ambition simultaneously braced against anxiety, families divulging stories of fear and resilience over dinner tables once reserved for celebration. Artists, creators, the architects of American fantasy, looked inward. Their art took on bolder, more courageous forms, sometimes darker in tone, always more conscious of fragility. At the same time, there was a rallying urge not to let fear win. Film and television in the wake of that night revealed a dual nature, beautiful escapism laced with sobering caution, lessons about both the blessings and costs of living in a city built on wishes. There was no going back. Hollywood had become a true heart of America, defined as much by its shadows as by its relentless, burning light.